We are back on Taking Care of Business with Clay and Marty. Our guest by phone is Dr. William Allen, who is the former chairman of the United States Commission on Civil Rights under President Reagan.
Dr. Allen, one of the comments you made as we were leaving a little while ago was that Israel can't count on Turkey. And my question would be, can Israel count on the United States?
Well, of course, in Israel, people must be asking that question just as they are in Saudi Arabia and all around the country. But I think the answer to that is a shorter and different answer than we might think. It's not the United States. It's the administration in charge. We may be going through a period when world leaders can no longer count on our current chief executive. Whether that chief executive is someone who, in the brief period of time he will exercise influence, will be able dramatically to shift the weight of United States influence is a separate question. I believe that most world leaders will understand that they can count on the United States even though they can't count on Mr. Obama.
So, Bill, are you saying very eloquently that our current president put Mr. Mubarak under the bus in a manner of speaking? Yeah. And I think that's the way the Saudis are looking at it, too. I would be very unhappy if I were the Saudis.
Yes, I think that's a fair assessment, and that is exactly what has happened.
What do you think the Arab world is going to look like in 5 years with all these potential changes coming on? I mean, all of these countries that have the potential for another revolution like this are countries that seem to be friends of ours. I mean, Iran has a similar revolution. The army comes in there and boom, it's gone, it's done. That's not the kind of thing you can do in a country like Egypt or Tunisia.
Well, that's certainly true, but the question is whether there are going to be differing power centers in the Middle East. One possible outcome of the current turmoil would be Turkey turning away from Europe and towards the Middle East and becoming the counterweight to Iran, and in fact replacing Iran as the major power in the area, the major power center. So if Turkey continues on the path it has been on in recent times, that would be its objective.
Would that be good for us?
Not necessarily. Remember that Turkey began this move as the Islamists came into power in Turkey. And turning away from Europe will mean forgetting about Ataturk's dream of secularism and finding a new position from which Turkey can hope to grow and defend itself rather than depending upon NATO. So I think Turkey is slowly moving away from the West.
Mm-hmm. Bill, one of the things I keep on hearing on the news is, how democracy is going to be the offspring of this. But, I keep on thinking, and I posted this on Facebook last night as a question to friends of mine. I said, when was the last time you saw a, quote, secular revolution lead to democracy? The French Revolution didn't. The Russian Revolution didn't. The Iranian Revolution didn't. The revolution in Eastern Europe did, but that was, Solidarity was a Catholic movement. So, when do secular revolutions or Islamic revolutions lead to democracy? I mean, I can't think of an instance in history. Can you?
I think you're absolutely correct in this, that they do not. That, in fact, secular revolutions almost always become radicalized, and they always devour their young. So that is the case. But I would remind you that in this case, we're not clear we're seeing a secular revolution yet. I know they're trying to sell it to us as a secular revolution in order to avoid frightening us with radical Islam. But I am highly skeptical about that account, and I do not believe it is or will be in the end a secular revolution. I think the Christian Coptics ought to be very frightened, every bit as much as Israel is at this point in time.
Well, I have heard that the Christians in Egypt are extremely concerned about the future, and the best thing that I think most of them can do is probably leave the country at this point.
Well, we should probably begin to see the reality of that in under 18 months.
Wow, 18 months? Yes. That's a short period of time.
It certainly is.
Yeah, I think so. I'd like to switch topics for a little bit for the remaining time that we have. The Obama administration. You're no particular friend of the Obama administration. Not that Clay and I are, but my big question is, what happened to the $1 billion? I feel like that little old lady in the old McDonald's or Carl's Jr. commercials. Where's the beef?
Well, it's certainly an important question to ask, but we can't really be sure that this president has acted at any point from a classical position of pursuing United States interests. He would say, and I would give him full credit for what he believes, that he's following U.S. interests, but he wouldn't always acknowledge that he's redefining that interest in ways that few of us would recognize as consistent with United States interest.
Do you see him winning the election in 2012?
Well, of course, it's possible. I produced, it must have been in the period just before, immediately after Christmas last December, a blog on the site called Big Peace, in which I discussed that, and I engaged in something I do not often do, which is prophesying. Mm-hmm. And I described how he would conduct himself for the next 2 years. I said to begin with, beginning January 1st, we'll be running a campaign for reelection. Which he's done. Mm-hmm. I said further, he will put aside his agenda that he pursued in the first 2 years, his leftist agenda, in order to try to lull the country into believing that he is really one of us, in order to win re-election so that he can then go forward full force to pursue that leftist agenda. I was very interested in the State of the Union when he spoke of winning the future, which I took to be code language, which is doubtless being supplemented in private conversations with his own political base. He wants them to know that what they have to do now is not pursue the policy agenda, but secure the future opportunity to pursue the policy agenda. That's what winning the future means. Everything now is for the sake of winning the next election. Is it possible? Well, as we have heard it said now since the 1860s, you can fool some of the people all of the time, all of the people some of the time, but you can't fool all of the people all of the time. So the question is, which will prevail in the next 2 years?
Well, even if he does get reelected, I'm not sure he will have much value when the Senate falls to the Republicans in this coming election.
Well, if he secures his reelection, it probably means that the Republicans will not be gaining control of the Senate and will be losing some proportion of the control it has in the House, if not losing it altogether. That's what his reelection will mean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you. It reminds me a lot of Clinton in his midterm elections. He did the same thing. All of a sudden, he, veered quite a bit to the middle so he could, claim the agenda, which really was Newt Gingrich's agenda, so he could claim the agenda and then run for re-election on that basis.
Yes, that's right. And his situation now is only different in the sense that he has to come off of a tremendous defeat to try to replicate Clinton's victory in running for re-election himself 2 years later. It's going to be extremely difficult, but it's clear he's going to pursue it in the most media-savvy and clever way possible.
Well, he is a rather clever individual, and he seems to be able to read extremely well from a teleprompter.
Well, there's no doubt about it. He's an effective public presenter. I don't subscribe to the general impression that he's eloquent. I say he's rather orotund, but I realize that's a word that no one uses anymore, and fewer still perhaps understand. But there's a difference between being eloquent and speaking in such a way as to lift people to a higher plane and simply speaking in order to impress.
The one thing that I've noticed in most of Obama's speeches, it's never a we or us. It's always an I or me.
Now, I will tell you something about that, because that was also part of my prediction. I said we will also discover that he will learn to use the first person plural. So this is all what I wrote in December and published. If you listen to the Chamber of Commerce address the other day, you will note that he used the first person plural 62 times.
Wow.
And used the first person plural almost not at all. Yes, we pointed out early in his administration that this man has a problem. He only knows the first person singular.
Right.
So that clearly there's narcissism involved here. But he's also learned it, because those of us who have written about it and talked about it, he learns and hears these things, not learn from them to correct himself, but learn to control the impression he gives. And so he's now doing that. And you will see more and more he'll be using that first person plural.
Mm-hmm. Bill, let's draw a contrast here, because I know you Ronald Reagan, you worked for him, or actually, you worked for him on his campaign for governor, if I remember right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. What was he like, from your perspective?
Wow, that's a very good question, because there's so many differing impressions one can form of him. Let's say the first and most important was that he had a singularity of sincerity that really captured you, particularly in face-to-face contact. And when a youth such as I was in 1966, when I first met him, could not resist the tremendous appeal of his sincerity. He treated each and every person as if he listened to them directly, heard what they were trying to say, and sought to communicate to them. So one came away from a contact feeling somewhat better about oneself than one might have before, simply because he was so very good at conveying that attentiveness to you. He also was someone who, as in the 1964 speech, had the incredible ability to voice the common concerns in a way that was not common, without seeming common. So the things we cared about, he gave voice to and made them seem important. That's what the distinction is. So that to ask what he was like is to say he was someone who gave you hope. He encouraged you to work in order to do good things and to seek to bring about changes.
Perfect. I know Clay has a question for you. Clay, why don't you ask that when we get back? Okay.
All right, thank you.
We'll be back in a minute on Taking Care of Business on Kern Radio Newstalk 1180.